Greetings everyone, welcome to another one of our free Friday community classes. This week we are just barely scratching the surface of one of my favorite pieces of plant lore, of herbal charm from the 10th century Anglo-Saxon 9 herbs charm. The 9 herbs charm, the lay of the 9 healing herbs, the 9 wort charm, all names that this incredible piece of plant lore, of verdant poetry has been known by over the years. The 9 herb charm, for folks who are new to this piece of textual genius, is an old English charm from somewhere around the 10th to the 11th century. It was part of a big compilation of medical documents called the Lacnunga, and those documents cover everything from healing the human person to helping heal livestock from diseases and infections and broken bones. It really is a materia medica for the ages and filled with beautiful plant lore and charms and anecdotes and insights into how folks of the Anglo-Saxon communities not only worked with the plants that grew where they grew, but also how they experienced the plants, and that is where I want to focus our discussion today. I am by no means an Anglo-Saxon expert or a scholar of Old English. I know very little of that broad spectrum topic, but I want to do a class where we at least just introduce the 9 herbs charm to folks because it is so cool, and I think there are lots of really creative and inspirational ways we could bring not only the 9 herb charm itself, but be inspired by this piece of how to craft herbal charms for ourselves, how we can use poetry and rhyme and prose and meter to create living charms that speak to the work that we're doing now, that speak to the plants that we're working with now. So for me, the 9 herb charm has always been an inspiration in my own writings and the way that I do charm work, and so that's really my point in introducing it to you today, as well as the one mystery that I think gets conveyed in this piece of poetry that I find the most important, which we will save until the end, so stick around. So the 9 herbs charm, the lay of the 9 healing herbs from the Lacnunga. The purpose of this particular charm is debated, but in my opinion, and also in my experience based on having worked with most of these herbs, I would say that this is an anti-toxin, anti-poison, anti-venom, possibly anti-infection charm. And that's on the physical level, but there's also definitely an aspect to this charm that speaks about toxicity in the being, in the energy or the subtle body of the person. So we might think in terms of, removing negative or toxic energy from a person or maybe even a space or an animal as a cleansing or purificatory charm. And for those folks who are more familiar with some of the herbs that have history in that part of the world, you will probably see that pattern emerge as we look at the different plants that are expressed in the 9 herbs charm. So the purpose is there, and there's also several times throughout the charm that the Anglo-Saxon pagan deity Woden, who is cognate with Odin, is mentioned. And it's really interesting because when I think of, again, not knowing a ton about Anglo-Saxon paganism, but when I think about the Anglo-Saxon world and the Anglo-Saxon pantheons and herb, wort cunning, Leechcraft, I think of Ingfreyr as being the deity that would have the most resonance with this kind of work. But what we see in the 9 herb charms is, of course, Woden being invoked at least 3 times. And I think this is interesting. It shows the complexity of the character and the person of Woden, but also reinforces that idea that this charm is about a purification. It's about a righting. It's about taking something, whether it's a tissue in the body or an energy of space that has become toxic, and bringing it back into a state of harmony, bringing it back into a state of rightness, uprightness, which is very Woden, right, through and through. And the kind of more petitionary prayer aspects of the Nine Herbs charm are interesting, because when Woden is invoked, he's invoked to offer his help to the plant spirits for them to do what they are being asked to do in the charm. So it's a bit of a trifecta charm, which is my favorite, where we have deity, plant spirit, sorcerer, right, coming together in this triune of power to create the magic that is trying to be made, or the healing that is trying to be made. So we see that purpose, that anti-toxic purpose, broad spectrum. We see Odin being invoked to bring his 9 twigs, his 9 staves, probably inscribed with runes that relate to the 9 herbs, and thus 9 powers that are both related to the plants themselves and also to more cosmic powers into this charm to help affect the end goal. And last but not least, there's a bit of numerology here that the Nine Herbs charm is written in references to 3s and 9s, right? Which is not surprising. The entirety of most of the Indo-European world loves the number 3 and the number 9, and we see the sacredness of 9 repeated in many of these traditions, and especially in the Anglo-Saxon world. So there's also some numerology, but to me it speaks almost more of cosmology, that there is a rhyme and a reason to things, that we're invoking 3s and 9s because they are patterns of harmony. They are patterns of beauty. And again, the charm is about reinstating a lack of toxicity, bringing somebody back into a state of strength or purity or cleanliness or rightness or whatever the case is. Very cool though to see those numbers pop up and to get to read into them just a wee bit, right? So the 9 herbs that are mentioned in the Lay of the 9 Healing Herbs are hotly disputed. Some of them we're pretty confident about, and when I say we, I don't mean me, I mean scholars who are smart and understand Old English and understand the relationship between Old English plant names and how those names may have transformed into the modern plant names, and trying to link the plant names used in the charm to plants as we know them now. So several of these 9 herbs we're quite confident about. We can say quite confidently, like, this is the herb they were talking about. A few of them, however, are a little tricky. The charm itself is presented in poetic, sort of a riddle. It's not confusing necessarily, but there is definitely some fascination in the lines, and there's definitely a feeling that common folk like myself would read it and get one meaning, and people who were initiated into the depths of the cunning practice, the Wort cunning practice, would maybe see it from a different angle, right? So we're meditating on the lines of the 9 herbs charm to hope that it will reveal some of its deep secrets to us and tell us a bit about not only that charm itself, but again, how herbs were connected with and worked with in Anglo-Saxon paganism and sorcery. So not all of the herbs are confidently ascribed to modern plant names, and so there's some guesswork here. The nice thing is that the charm is relatively descriptive in the personhood of the plants, and so I have even seen folks and myself take herbs that are not easy to find, or ones that maybe I'm not as confident working with, and saying, okay, what is said about this herb, and what herb do I have a relationship that fits that description, right? And so we could almost rewrite the 9 Wort spell to include 9 herbs that are bioregional to us, or that are part of our own personal repertoire, which is very cool to me to think about that. So the 9 herbs that have been reconstructed by Cameron in his book Anglo-Saxon Medicine, which came out in 1993. This is a really, really cool book for people who get nerdy about plant lore. Cameron says mugwort, which we're quite confident about, plantain, and this is plantain the herb, not plantain the banana-like plant, also very confident on that one. Lamb's cress, fumitory, chamomile, one of the confident ones, nettle, crabapple, chervil, and fennel. So we have these 9 herbs. Some of them more confidently reconstructed than others, but all of them make sense in the greater scheme of what this charm, what this plant spell is about. So there's room again for meditation, for study, for contemplation of how mugwort, plantain, lamb's cress, fumitory, chamomile, nettle, crabapple, chervil, and fennel come together as a grouping of 9 and play together. And just like when herbalists formulate a remedy, right? So when I write an herbal remedy for a client, I'm looking at not only the place that each individual herb holds in that remedy, but I also have to see where the grouping of herbs, in this case 9 herbs, overlap. Because if they all share a common virtue, a common power, that power will be magnified greater than the sum of that remedy's parts. So what we look for from the lens of green sorcery, from the lens of spiritual herbalism, the way that I practice it, what I'm looking at when I read the charm is what common thread weaves through these 9 plants. What is really being lifted up among all the cool things that each of these plants do, the lists and lists of virtues that they have? What's the common denominator? What are we invoking with this charm? And that's why I talk about this anti-poison, physical and energetic, anti-toxic, physical and energetic aspect to the charm. And of course, the invocation of Woden and his 9 staves certainly supports that direction. So with that, I will say that the entirety of the charm is written down in the details below. I would love for you to read it. I've also put some book recommendations, but before we go, I want to share with you the thing that has been the most meaningful to me about the 9 Wort Spell. What it is about this poem that has captivated my attention and made it such an important part of how I think about herbs and how I engage with herbs, and that is how the plants are addressed and worked with in the charm. When you read the charm yourself below, you will see that they are petitioned, they are invoked, they are in some cases wooed, right? There is a very clear understanding in the charm that it is the spirit, it is the personhood of the plant that the sorcerer is connecting to. They are not repeating a reductionist charm. Hey, herb, you do this, so do this, you know, in this very prescriptive way. No, they are invoking the spirit of the plant, the person that that plant is, in the same way that they're invoking the person that is Woden. And so there is a true sorceress undertaking here. The sorceress undertaking being that we are a person relating to other non-human persons to create the desired goal. So this is true green sorcery, true plant spirit work, the way that I practice it. And so when I read this charm, it edifies my practice. It reminds me that these traditions of plant spirit work, of animism, of green sorcery, of relating to the plant spirits as beings that share their world with us, who are fully conscious, fully aware, fully in communication with those who can slow down to tree speed and relate to them. This has been practiced since time immemorial. It is nothing new. It is in my bones. It is something my deep ancestors understood, and it fires me up. So for folks of any ancestry, of any cultural or traditional history, you go back not too far, in this case, just to the 10th and 11th century, and we have clear documentation of the animistic plant spirit practices of our kinfolk, and that is so super cool. So, resources down below, a couple of my favorite books on the subject, if you are interested. Of course, a complete rendering of the 9 Herbs charm itself, and a couple of little notes. Hopefully this was interesting to you. My plan is to do a couple of more deep dives into the 9 Herbs charm over time. I always feel, some imposter syndrome because I am not an Anglo-Saxon or Old English scholar. I struggle with the Old English language and the pronunciation, and there are nuances to understanding this charm that, I may never fully grasp. But I think between, personal green gnosis experience and all of the incredible resources below, we can get a really beautiful understanding of the spell. And if not working with it directly, use that spell as inspiration again for the crafting of our own charms and spells. So with that, if you would like access to all of our courses, advanced classes, and all of that, please come hang out with us over on the Patreon, support my work, enter into sacred reciprocity with me and with the plants. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so that I know you're out there. If you have questions or comments, drop them in the comments below. And until next time, peace and plenty.